am I supposed to do now?
All you gotta do is clip this on you and walk out with me.
Let me do this. Here? Are there people online? Yeah, like 2 or 3? Can't tell.
Yeah, but
Do you archive it or?
yeah, it'll be accessible instead. Okay, yeah. So I'll do my quick little intro and then we'll get to it.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming out here tonight. My name is Tiffany and I'm the marketing and event coordinator here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have Michael Thomas here with us tonight to celebrate the Broken King. But before we get started, I wanted to point out some logistics for how tonight's event is going to go. If you need to use the restroom at any point, the door is located right next to the Moleskine spinner on the right side of the room. We'll be doing hand-raised audience Q&A toward the end of the discussion, so start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them tight. After the talk tonight, Michael will be signing and personalizing books at the table next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to line for that, so don't worry. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of The Broken King online using the link in the live stream description. The Broken King, from the author of Man Gone Down, a New York Times top 10 book of the year and winner of the Impact Dublin Literary Award, comes a deeply personal memoir of race, trauma, alcoholism, parenting, mental illness, and ultimately hope in a portrait of 3 generations of Black American men. Michael Thomas is the author of the national bestseller Man Gone Down, winner of the International Impact Dublin Literary Award, and a New York Times top 10 novel of the year. His writing has appeared in A Public Space, the New York Times, and in Ben George's anthology, The Book of Dads. He's a professor of English at Hunter College, which I also love. He lives in Brooklyn. So without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to Michael.
Okay, good night. Thanks everyone for coming. It's been a while. Can you hear me?
I'm just going to raise it a little bit.
Check 1, check 2. Better?
Get it on the back.
That was for you, Mo. There's something about it's that. Let me get the tech guy on it. There you go, Mo. Go, Mo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. All right.
We appreciate it.
Yeah. This is the village taking thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Mo. So many people here to thank. Old friends, new friends, colleagues. People talk a lot about the author's struggle in writing something. They seem very interested in all that. I seem to be somewhat dissociative about all that. I want to talk briefly about the people in the author's life who struggle. So I want to say thank you, Sarah. Thank you, my colleagues who are right here, my editor, my agent, Elizabeth's back there. I think Maria is somewhere. My close friends who have been there for me over the years, but mostly my kids. Because I get this in the end, but they missed me. Anyway, yeah, so we're going to get maudlin. I'm going to read you the lightest section in the book. I'm going to try not to joke because these aren't joking times. And I was thinking over here, and I know this is trite, but this is the time to live every moment. You know, we don't know what we have. We don't know what we've lost, but you know, what am I going to do? So this is chapter 3 or book 3 or essay 3. I try to market it as a collection of linked essays. Grove Atlantic thought that was a terrible idea, and so they called it a memoir. So one of the things I discovered in writing this is about neurodivergence. and I was writing a chapter about neurodivergence, but then in editing and rereading everything and trying to actually read my own book, I realized how neurodivergent I am, truly dyslexic. And so this chapter is about my second son, Miles. And those of you who know Miles might know what I'm talking about. When he was about 8, we discovered he had a non-specific cognitive disorder, which they called it in the earlier part of the century. Now it's neurodivergent. When I was a kid, it was called something else in the 70s. But during that evaluation, the evaluator, said, "Well, like father, like son." And I looked at her, "Well, what the fuck are you talking about?" And Miles's mom looked at me and said, "Don't you know?" "Know what?" So, Mo, I'm going to need you again. Thank you. So this chapter is about watching my son struggle and celebrate, but also going back and thinking about what the hell happened. You know, being a black kid in the 70s in Boston, you weren't called neurodivergent, you were called something else. So our two, one of our favorite books, Miles and I, Moby Dick, and so this chapter is called What Pip Saw. Should I explain Pip? It's time to get neurodivergent. I will start to lecture you on things and you can't leave. Okay. So he saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom and spoke it, and therefore his shipmates called him mad. Herman Melville, Moby Dick. This is a story of us going for a bird walk in Central Park. Miles was obsessed with dinosaurs and then birds. We got out, just the two of us. He still liked holding hands, and at the bottom of our Brooklyn stoop, he took mine. Until he spoke, people often believed he was a couple of years older than he was. His voice, unlike his older brother's gravelly tenor, was high and thin. His big body lacked gravity too, but he wasn't light. His skip was more of a lumber. His bones were thick and large. He was painfully solid, and it hurt to collide with him. Still, he didn't seem to be all there. It was how he looked and looked at. He didn't focus on anything for more than a few seconds. Not on the material plane, anyway. He seemed to be studying forms in other realms that demanded his deepest concentration. Wherever his attention was, so was a portion of his density, and all of this imbued him with a flightiness that belied his mass. And so, his hand in mine, without shame, he thumped lightly beside me, chattering about whatever appeared to him, unaware of what a strange partner he was. Too big, too gone, and at least with me, too white. But he wasn't anybody's white boy. He was mine. And while it was difficult for strangers to reconcile the two of us together, it was obvious to us and to those who bothered to look and listen that we were father and son. So then we go to Central Park. Miles had a list of birds he wanted to see. Enceroformes, Caprimulliformes, Carthididae, and of course, Hyraves. I told him that I wanted to see an owl in the wild, that I'd only seen traces or heard them in the distance at night. He cleared his throat. Strange forms. He turned to me, looked at the path, and raised an eyebrow. In the distance, I heard Leonard Nimoy say, "Fascinating." Then, from the window of the Museum of Science in Boston, I sensed that behind the mist, the Esplanade. I stopped abruptly and stood at attention. Miles slowed and folded his hands behind his back. The only diurnal owl in these parts, I believe, is the screech owl. He stopped and softly pointed at a nearby tree. It's mating season. They will be screeching. He cleared his throat again. I thought he might try to mimic one. He didn't. Instead, he made sure I knew the differences between the regional members of their order, and haltingly offered a prosaic ode to them, though I don't think he realized what he was doing so. We didn't have his Audubon guide or the notebook in which he'd written the names. While I was confident that we'd remember our catalog, I was worried what would happen when the birds didn't present themselves in order. He seemed okay, though. The mourning doves and chickadees seemed to have granted him enough time until they did. We walked casually through the middle of the park. If he hadn't occasionally talked about the birds he'd heard, either real or imagined, I might have forgotten why we were there. We were alone now. The paths were empty. No one seemed to be coming. He spoke, Spinus tristis. I looked down at him. He was grinning. He continued, the American goldfinch. Spiny sorrow. Nothing. Then, they won't be bright now. Have you heard one? I asked. Why, yes, several. Which is theirs? He paused and leaned back. Do you hear that one? Amidst cooing doves and the clamor of jays, the tweets and whistles were a blur. I shook my head. He seemed pleased. I tried to focus. Do you hear? I thought I could. There's a second song, too, a second song. He cleared his throat and tried to stretch up to the sound. Par-tee-tee-tee-tee. He looked at me partially and waited for my response. I tried. Par-tee-tee-tee-tee. It's hard for you. Your voice is low. Well, I raised my eyebrow and pointed up at nothing. Perhaps we should keep moving before something we don't want to know responds. It's okay. He checked the air. It's okay. It's a different thing when you begin in a quiet place to enter one that is quieter still. You bring peace with you. We could be quiet and look for things, and he would tell me the birds we saw. Some I knew, some I misnamed, some I didn't know. There were traces of other creatures. We had to track them. There were signs of that which might have been there. We left the path and wandered through the mist and between the trees. Sometimes we held hands. Sometimes we drifted apart, but we are still apart. We knew the other was there. He didn't need to lecture or even talk about what we saw. He didn't tell me what I should look for. We didn't need to share our experiences to make them real. Miles called and sang to himself and didn't mind whether I was listening or not, only that I was listening to something deeply. When I was a boy, I wondered if I existed and if I was here. I had to see something that would tell me I was real and present, and I had to wait for it to come. I still wonder. Chock full of nuts is that heavenly coffee. My parents didn't drink that. My father liked instant. I used to make it for him. I can feel his voice in the lower regions of the boiling water and his wheeze in the punctured can of carnation. I can feel his razor stubble in the freeze-dried grind. But my mother isn't there, not in the taster's choice. She's not in the Corningware percolator or its blue flowers. She's in the bacon grease, hot danger. Sunday mornings, good Sunday mornings. The sizzle, the cast iron pan, the blue flame, the oily rainbow and soap suds. The lard she'd never use in the U-Bahn can, like her pupils, soft, ivory, salty, and sweet. A Virginia I'd never know is sunlight behind dust. I can't find her. She could still be in the kitchen near me, but I can only feel her in the popping grease. My father isn't there. He's in his car. I'm alone with him in the front seat, Seattle Street, right on Cambridge, Bear Right, and a half mile along the tracks to the Lincoln Cafe, the darkened bar with the dark white men, the empty tables, the light in the windows of the kitchen's double doors. I get to push them open. There's relief in the oven's radiant heat. My father is in the thick cut of pepperoni that Angelo offers me, still on the knife. But pizza night was Friday night, and I can't find my way home, not even through the grease burns. My mother dropped the skillet. My mother threw the skillet when she caught me feeding the dog salami. The handle broke off. There was a V cleft in the side. Back on the stove, we moved it by hand with a dish towel. How do I get to the cleft iron pan, and how do I get back? I don't know if I can or want to return to the judgment I'll face. But I can't remain there picking at the flaking metal. I can't hide in the pantry cabinet. I don't know what will find me. I need time to return. And I might return with nothing. I don't know what I need now, but then, believe me, if you had stayed where we parted, I would have come back to you. Par-tee-tee-tee-tee, the sorrow bird in the mist. His was a love song, not because it celebrated his love, but his hope for it. This is how we love sometimes, and this is how it must be. I felt a sadness that didn't seem to be mine. It felt too old and too great. I didn't want to carry it. Then, somewhere in the mounds and trees of the park, there was Tristan, alone, but at the beginning of the story, recounting the first time ever I saw your face. From the age of 10 to 11, we moved 3 times in a year, and I went to 4 schools. Beth Clavin's. Unlike the distinct freckles on her cheeks, the cluster around her nose formed a little cloud. When I was 16, I walked Sarah Morris home. It was Friday, late April, the first day of short sleeves. We were trying hard to deny that we liked and might be liked by the other. I remember I didn't want or know how to be near her, so I started talking about the stars we couldn't see and how there's something always beyond. I'd been reading Douglas, Emerson, Melville, and Thoreau. I started with a joke about being lost in the middle of the previous century. She laughed, but I don't think she thought it was funny. I lectured, then lectured on apology and cosmic humility, but that made me feel alien and distant, but also known and present, and my presence was a burden. My heart seemed far from me, but I still felt it break a little. Somewhere, I started writing a tragedy about love that couldn't be. I felt desperate and robotic. I apologized again. She laughed. Again. She was there because she wanted to be. We walked. We neared her house. I started talking about Walden, red ants, and black. We crossed a busy street and stopped on a median. In the thin grass and sand were small anthills. I gestured for her to watch with me. I told her, the universe does not make us small. She knelt and watched the busy citizens. I told her that they were fire ants. She froze. I laughed. She looked up at me, perplexed. I smiled, bent, and gently raised her by her forearm. Our hands came together as we stood. We looked at each other for the first time. For a moment, I got to show her how and what I love. She smiled. I think I did too. Both girls were white. Both accounts are still painful to recall. The hurt, though, doesn't live in being spurned or dumped. It's in every instance I, for whatever reason, couldn't or wouldn't allow myself to feel peace, hope, freedom, or love. And I don't mean that I hoped for a white girl to love me, or that when there was peace in our land, we could be free to love. It was that I often felt flawed. I lacked basic knowledge most others, white and black, had, and my life was tragic. I didn't know how I'd inherited such an existentialist belief. It pre existed my reading their texts, but I'd learned just in time to die. I spent a lot of time seeking corroboration, but I wasn't completely convinced of my fate. I knew, though sometimes only dimly, that the most desperate sounding songs were hopeful. No matter how grieving she sounds, Roberta Flack always reminds me that there's shared joy that can fill the world and last forever. An older white couple passed us. They'd been listening. Miles turned to them. He looked at them as if they were students who had entered his class late. He cleared his throat and continued to differentiate songs and calls. I watched them. They didn't know why this boy was alone in the park lecturing about a bird who wasn't there. I don't know if they were more confused or relieved when Miles took my hand and led me away. Regardless, the couple followed. This happened a few more times with different people until Miles was leading a group of 7 into the center of the park, explaining the nuances of voicings and plumage, anecdotes about the intelligence of crows and ravens and how to tell them apart, old and new world vultures, and misconceptions concerning owls. We left the paved walk and ascended a small hill along a winding path. We stopped about 10 yards before a makeshift camp of shopping carts, a milk carton, shreds of blue tarp, garbage bags, and sodden cardboard and blankets. Like everything else, the barren branches, the dim air, and our silence made each item stand out. I know he saw it, but I don't know what it meant to him if he asked the question, who lives there? Who did he imagine, and why? The homeless and the very poor people in his life were predominantly black or brown, and I think I was the wealthiest black person he knew. I could tell he wanted to say something, but didn't know what. I wondered if he pictured what color whoever lived there was, if he immediately saw them as brown. He certainly had the data to suggest such, but I don't think he had the apparatus to engage, not in the moment. My father never seemed to have the ability to do so, and at times the willingness. The isms and schisms had an aesthetic, philosophical, or moral unity. Of course, I didn't think that at the time. I only heard my father idly humming. He was somewhere in those trees. I wondered if Miles was hearing more than the birds and the distant city traffic. I wondered if he'd heard what his followers hadn't said. What had Miles assigned to race? And if he had assigned anything, what was it? He thought of himself as brown. Had he considered what that meant? If so, he needed more than the white people in his life, what they had to offer. For it seemed to me that all they could do when challenged was retreat to the sanctuary that privilege affords. How would I begin to talk to my white son about that person or people who might live there? How would I convince him that we were bound to and responsible for them? If one really believed in what was good and right, one could never look away from anything in this world. Our first responsibility was to see the privilege of doing so. Our second, to know that what we see has consequence and weight. None of this was Miles's problem. He had two parents and he was white, but then none of this should have been mine. So perhaps it was everyone's. Miles told everyone, I am brown. In his self portraits, he's brown, yet he was praised for how white he looked, and thus would never be imperiled by being seen as black. But is acute and chronic suffering the ultimate credential for being black? Or is that what you make of any or all individual and collective pain? I've been told many times that I wasn't black. I didn't sound black. I didn't act black. I didn't like black things. Somehow my life resided within that scope and judgment. I was assessed, defined, and filed. If I challenged the conclusion, I was a problem. I wanted something more for my son. I wanted him to know that there was more than living life in the gaps and on the fringes of anxious white people. They only knew of closed systems in which, if they hadn't already, would spin themselves hollow. I wanted him to know that there was something larger than all of us with which we had to comply. Death, yes, but also life. A life among others, regardless of who those others were. And the guidance through this life, though it had everything to do with humans, wasn't a product of human affairs. I wanted to tell him that if there's an end to suffering, one must first learn to live with it. Everyone's. I wanted to tell him about the soul. We all had one, and he could sing about his and everyone's, even if he was anybody's white boy. He was my white boy. And so he was young, gifted, and black. Mulatto, quadroon, whatever he was. He'd been given so much, Tunis at least, the one drop at least. And in the one drop was something old and faithful and triumphant, seemingly not of this world, but of course it was. It's us and our willingness to always look beyond the world while living in it. This twin life made us deeper and wider. Jesus hadn't, nor would he ever save black people. Black people had and would. Perhaps we had and would continue to save this country because of what we have given and not taken. I wanted to tell him about the blues. I remember riding the Orange Line only one time. It was one way. I was 5. We were going to visit my paternal grandmother. My father was still living with us, but he didn't take us. I don't know why. I'm certain, however, that he wasn't there. I see him at work in downtown at Boston's Gilchrist department store, or I see him in the lounge at the Ramada. He might not have been at either location, but I can't see him on the trolley. I've never seen him on a trolley. He would have driven, but he did not. His car failed inspection and the windshield was covered with a red rejected sticker. But those laws came 3 years later, I think. So that probably wasn't the reason. I know, though, that my mother's Tempest was parked in what had been our cornfield. There were hornets in the trunk, mice in the seats, and mosquito and dragonfly larvae in the footwell puddles. My mother had promised us pepper steaks. I didn't know how we'd get them. There were only 2 sub shops I could tolerate. Their griddles didn't taint the beef with mushroom and onion. They were only accessible by car and in the wrong direction. Of course, she made her own, which was, of course, better than anything any place had. I was charged with packing the cold aluminum stumps into a Star Market bag. The subs were too short. They weren't wrapped in wax paper. The grease couldn't render the foil translucent. There was no steam sharp with salt and mellowed by fat. Fortunately for all of us, we were out the door before I could speak. On the porch, I'd wonder if only one of my socks was right side out. I thought to look down and check. She must have been exceptionally tired, stressed, and sad, and might have been wondering if the lights would be on when we got back home, if she had enough money to get us back home, and why she had chosen to take us to visit a woman who hated her, the mother of a man who would soon leave her. I was wondering about our lunch. Wondering isn't the word. I was reliving all the hidden, soggy onions I'd bitten into and how it felt to have my mother watch. I wouldn't look up. I tried to pretend that I hadn't noticed the fungi in vegetables or had suddenly grown to like them. And if I couldn't convince her, I'd rather she threatened to slap the food out of my mouth than to apologize to me. I didn't want to hurt her with me. I was trying not to worry that the meat was sliced and not shaved. None of us saw him. Not even as my mother passed out our handcrafted sandwiches. Not even when I opened mine. Suddenly he was sitting next to me. He was staring across the aisle. I looked away. He looked at me. We did this multiple times. Finally, we looked at each other. His face was very dark. His eyes were pale gray. He looked away and mumbled, "Can I have a bite?" I didn't answer. Still looking and at seemingly nothing. "Can I have a bite?" I would have told him no. Even now, I can't share bites or sips, though I will give anyone a piece, pour them a portion, or give them all I have. But that was too much for me to explain, for both of us, so I remained silent. He turned to me, empty eyed. "You won't help anyone, not even your own color." He left. No one else saw him. My mother threatened me, something to do with peppers and how I better not look for them. I forced it all down and later vomited on the tracks. Neither my mother nor my siblings saw it, though they must have. I don't remember the visit. We took a cab home. My mother paid in change. The driver, a fat old white man who smelled terrible, called her a bitch, but only after she'd gotten out. When we got inside, Neil Diamond's Song Sung Blue was on WHDH. It was wrong. It was and is an atrocious song. It's vapid while claiming knowledge of the blues. I didn't need to feel better. I needed to know how to ask what's going on, which might have been playing a few turns up the dial, but WILD didn't have a cash call jackpot. But the lights were on. My mother was happy to be home. And in my head, out of a mix of brothers greeting brothers, I heard the alto sax rise, the rim shot echo, the bass stroll, and Marvin, tenor and falsetto, show me what I could do and how I could be the next time. Quote, "It's almost over." This is Baldwin. "The person who distrusts himself has no touchstone for reality." End quote. If this is still true, which I believe it is, then integration demands we all find the rock and cling to it. But integration still is confused, perhaps willfully, with assimilation, even erasure. Be it the Sisyphean, the lodestone, the ragged, or the rock of the soul, this is reality. To assimilate in this country at this time, one must habitually refuse to acknowledge facts, surrender any hope for living an ethical life, and capitulate to the attitudes and actions by and with which we cruelly defend our unrealities and brutally multiply and expand them. One cannot trust themselves if attitude, desire, opinion, and fear are the measures by and how they judge themselves and others. The rock is a hard thing. America will be great when its people accept the responsibility or are allowed the opportunity of learning how to renew themselves at the fountain of their own lives. This fountain can only heal if we have faith in perpetual rejuvenation. I think we must forget the self to restore the self. Back then, when I talked to my teenage friends about Sarah, they'd say I was a hopeless romantic. People say it now. They were and are confused. For romanticism is the substance of the pragmatic, whose first and last action is to hope. The tour abruptly ended. The white people departed. Miles and I stayed. We stood holding hands. He looked very sad and quiet. "A pteridai," he said after a long silence. He was pointing at a small patch near a pile of takeout containers. "A blackbird? A red-winged blackbird." He sculpted its shape from the air, though the color pattern through the wings is red and yellow. "Jaundiced." He ignored my comment. "The stripes make it appear to be in flight." He looked away. "That's a male." "It's beautiful." "Yes," he said. "The colors seem to make it fast, but then they're just red when you see it quickly and from afar." It flew. "It's going to be a cold, wet evening," I said. "Quite." He looked about, then back at the encampment. "My mother used to tell me, you don't have the sense to come in out the rain. We should keep moving." His jaw started quivering. I took it as a yes. We walked slowly and without purpose. If we didn't move, the train wouldn't come. The rain wouldn't come. We could stay and wait and recover what it seemed we'd lost, or what I thought we'd lost. I had memories of being frightened in my head. When I was his age, on some nights, the darkness of my room simply meant the lights were out, and others, it meant I was going to die. In between the two, I think, where I often lived, simplicity was baffling. I wet the bed because there seemed at times a scrim between me and the toilet. I couldn't teach myself how to tear through it and pee. My parents, opposed as they were, both said, It doesn't make sense. That phrase didn't make sense. Reason was intellectual, sense was a physical experience. I felt that they demanded I was an active participant in making it. I felt a failure because I couldn't. I couldn't show them how or tell them that my basic needs were so distant that they could have been someone else's. I couldn't find the bathroom and I couldn't stay in the chilling wet sheets, so I tried to make another place to be. The past from where I could extract a gentle memory, the future where I could be alone. Would Miles have to be alone? One of the crueler things we can do to a child is normalize societal pathology. It forces them, if they're to thrive, to rely on wit rather than gestating wisdom, all the while trying to maintain the basic principles that separate right and wrong. They covertly practice ethics within themselves. They must somehow find, without becoming a martyr or a sociopath, sanctuary for beauty, dignity, and love. If there is a light inside them, they must keep it from going out. And while their inner cosmos is unfathomable, the world outside is dangerous. The problem of the 21st century is still the color line, the class line, the gender line, all of it. I see Du Bois wandering, lonely as a cloud. The line is something we must not only must dare to cross, but also look up and down and wonder when it will end. How will we let each other be? It seems impossible still to do so. It will always seem impossible until we choose a life of meaning over a life of comfort. Those who believe that a comfortable life is a substantive life will never discern the difference between fear and danger or offense and harm. Most white people I know, even those I love, won't understand what a drag it is not only to see them, but to be with them and watch them fret and grind about everyday trivialities. But for me, to lament another's lament is to trivialize what I've suffered and what they've suffered. So few of us get to travel the road of freedom. Most of us are lost or waylaid along the way. I made it. I believe that when one is free, onus becomes responsibility, and responsibility is a privilege. We get to choose how we try to help others be free. So few of us get to freely love. For many of us, the thought of being in love is perilous because the act of love is punishable by death. But the chance to love and be loved is our birthright. The experience is an honor, and no human can, and no God would revoke this. We might not choose who we are or who we love, but we can choose how we act in love. And even if we've never been free or have loved in freedom, can't we hope it for others? Miles and I were still alone together. The birds were still singing. The sky didn't threaten rain. There was no fight here. Though I remembered why we'd come, and I sensed our reason was right, I squeezed his hand and pulled him back to the road. Thank you. It is time for the questions and the answers. I'll ask the questions. You provide me with the answers. Anyone? I have old students here. I can just call on them. Anyone?
That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Mama. But yes.
When did you figure out you were a neurotypical?
Still figuring it out. I was 40. So I thought it perhaps was a little eccentric, but mostly normative. But the difference is, phenotypically, Miles is light-skinned, green-eyed, light-haired, and away from me, people think he's white, unless it's deep in the summer and he's been working like on the docks. Then he just looks suspiciously brown. But he grew up with two parents, and he grew up going to St. Anne's, and he grew up relatively peaceful without the cops beating the shit out of him. And he got to be less covert, let's just say. Yeah, so 40. Some good coping mechanisms developed up to that point, though.
How old is he now?
He is 26.
When the writing of this that, how did you arrive at that? Because you could have been walking through city streets, but instead, you're moving through nature and having this experience as a child. Wondering.
Well, it's just the story of us going to Central Park, and it's really just how his mind works in one way, and my mind works in another. And so it's a walk through the park is a very simple thing, but it's never a simple thing because of the birds and the memory and the leaves and the threat of rain, and then your father humming in the distance and Tristan and Isolde, and there are operas going on, and just how do you make it into something, and then how do you just let it pass? Yeah. But there are always stories going on. Yeah.
In writing the book or before publishing or whatever, like at what point did you talk to your children about the fact that you're writing?
A couple of months ago. Well, yeah. Sorry to be glib. They were little. Alex, who's in the first chapter, was 11. He's 29. Miles was 8. And I thought I'd dash this off in 6 months. So very different. Which is why I talk about, or I want to share about how difficult it must have been for them, like to watch me struggle, but also know that I was going to be writing about them. And it's very different as a kid trying to imagine that. And they're very different men. I'm not going to reveal who they are, but they have very different experiences. So I think it weighed on them in different ways over time. In the early spring, I gave them advanced reading copies and wrote them letters. And my oldest lives on the other side of the country, but he read it in a couple of days and said it was a quick read, an easy read. He said he was proud of me. So I know it'll change. It'll keep changing, I'm sure. Maybe when they have kids of their own. So, sorry, I'm neurodivergent. Did I answer your question? Okay, I got distracted. There's a bird singing somewhere, probably in my head. Did somebody else have a question? Yeah.
One of the poems you quote in the book is, I think, the more loving one.
Yeah.
Just wondering for your perspective on that poem, what it means to you.
Oh, Auden? I mean, it's multifaceted. One, what's a different chapter, Sam? But one is, I think, tied to neurodivergence. Feeling, I grew up and for a long time felt I couldn't have reciprocity in a relationship. So I had to be the lover and not the beloved because I didn't know how to receive love. And being the beloved or being the lover, you can act and not receive, and you can regard and not be seen. But there's a mix of it. My brother is the person who gave me that poem, and we have a troubled relationship. He gave me Auden's collected works. I love Auden. He spent time around here. And I have a problematic relationship with Auden, of course, as most people should have with most poets, because most of them were just horrible people. No. So I'm sorry, Tim, does that answer your question? Yeah. I honestly just love the poem. Love the poem. Yes.
As you're doing something as simple as walking through the park with your son,
Mhm.
as the people gather and they say, "Oh, this kid is alone," and you ever feel like, have you felt like you were gonna lose your children?
Always.
Simply because.
Always.
you
Still
know,
do.
Yeah.
Always felt like they were going to be taken from me, and into a world I couldn't follow. When I'd show up at a birthday party, the drop-off birthday parties, to pick Miles up, they just send some black kid out. And Miles and I look so much alike, and we sound alike. And he's like, "Hi, Dad," and people would do this triple take. The way people treated my mother with all my kids, like she was, a nanny. And watching people just struggle with our family. Um, uh, and it's, yeah, them going to a place, you at some point you cannot follow your children, right? But to have the feeling, and I'm not saying it's a fact, but the feeling that they were being taken, or what you'd have to do, how you'd have to contort yourself to fit in those spaces. But it also makes me think about my mother, who comes from the Jim Crow South. I mean, she grew up with burned crosses and lynching, and she came to the North and just like busted her ass, right, to give her 3 children, a stranger in a strange land, the best education she possibly could give us, and it alienated us from her. Um, and she couldn't follow us to these spaces, or if she did, she was hyper vigilant. She knew she was good enough, and she knew she would never embarrass us. It wasn't about that. It was like, my mom's from among the first generations of divorce in America. So she's a poor black lady with 3 kids in rich white schools, and she's a golder. Or she's just, all these things are imposed on her. So just watching her move like that when I was a kid, and then watching her watch me move like that, or the two of us moving through these worlds, and like, how do you do it? Sarah and I were here outside in the car listening to One Drop. We feel it in the One Drop, right? Which is a play on the One Drop, right? And sometimes it's Marley. I walk right through them. I walk right through them. But sometimes I always wanted Miles to just hear the birds. But then I didn't want him to hear the birds at all, right? You have to be here, right? You can't walk around. But why can't you? Oh, anyway, sorry. Okay,
One more.
one more. Yes, Sadie.
A really quick moment about feeling like you don't exist. I have 2 questions. Do you talk about that more in the book? And also, does it feel connected at all to the Baldwin quote about not trusting yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. But I'm sure most people have imposter syndrome or feel fraudulent. Yeah, I didn't feel like I was here, and I think that's part of the wiring. And this gets back to, I think, something Sam, you asked, and well, everyone's asked. There is the nature and the nurture, right? So, but if you happen to read the book, trigger alert. There's a lot of shit that goes on, and a lot of trauma, and so being dissociative or coping mechanisms, and how to survive the world, right? And you can't be seen by the cops, right? Either you have to hide or you have to wear the mask, and you always have to have it, right? Or the teacher or the parent or whomever. So there's a way of disappearing. But then there is just the life of the mind, or just simple wiring. Like, I wouldn't know if I was here. I'd be standing at my cubby and like, what's going on? I'd be other places, or I couldn't be sure where I was. But I couldn't admit that, ever, because then you're a mark. Always. So yeah. And then you just lose. I shouldn't say you. One might lose where they are and who they are. But then you get Melville on the deck, both guns blazing at everybody, right? It's like, Mike, fuck them. They ain't shit. Yes.
My mulatto quadroon daughter also went to St. Anne's.
Yeah.
I always found it St. Anne's very unhelpful with any kind of neurodivergence or different ways of learning. Maybe all the story that boy who ended up committing suicide early, come back and the chart. So your kids are a couple of years behind mine. But I'm curious about if you care to tell us about how you made peace with St. Anne's, if you did, and you know how your kids, especially this one, Miles. I mean, it's such a wonderful school in so many ways, but it can, you know, be so difficult for some kids, or not, or half and half.
I don't want to be curt, but I mean that's life, right? I mean, you just have to make choices and accept the consequences of the choices. I have a fourth kid
No,
there,
we shouldn't
right?
second guess ourselves, but yeah.
Oh no, well I constantly it's fallibilism is my bubble gum. I just walk around chewing on that stuff. But so for my oldest, it was one thing. For my second was another thing. For my daughter was another thing, and for our youngest or our kid, it's something very different. I know where he would be going, and I know where my youngest, how mightily he struggled. And they're just different kinds of struggles, no matter where you go. Like, how can you keep your kid in the safest possible place? And can they recognize danger, right, or fear, right, and offense and harm? But that's up to parents. I don't trust institutions. I trust people, and people within institutions. So I think that's how my kids made it through that place, because there were some really good people. But institutions are, the rock, right? I mean, that's what fucked up everything good about what Christ was talking about, right? And Paul's like, this is how things should be. Come on. Yes. If you like, let's be formal. Yep.
You're saying to live in the moment, right, Professor Thomas? So right now, in your current way of life, what would you say is the most important thing you find yourself focusing on? You had that line about onus becomes responsibility, right?
Yeah.
In my thought, it's raising good kids, right? Raising good people, going out there and creating change in the world, right? Or I don't know, like what is the primary focus of or purpose that you find yourself prioritizing?
Right now, it's reading and talking to people and taking things seriously and understanding that I have proxies. One is I can be sardonic and deflect quite a bit. So in this moment, it's being honest, and also just a student a few years ago gave me a compliment, and I just and she said, you're calling me an idiot by dismissing me like that. I don't know what your parents did to you. How dare you? I am Professor Thomas. No, I didn't do it. And I said, yeah, thank you. So it's hard to take myself seriously because I'm an absurd creature. It's, I look at the cover of the book, I'm like, who's this asshole? But I take people seriously. It's just, it's always changing. And if you read the book, you'll know that I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober 30 years, and sometimes it's just minute to minute. It's just, I don't know what the right thing to do is right now. I'm going to just stand over here for a second and not do the wrong thing. And sometimes all you have is that minute, which isn't comforting in these times at all. Patience, peace. But I think that is mistaken for weakness. Colin Craig. So, one more or two more? Okay, can we do two more? Because I have a colleague too. Great. Yes, and they let me know. My two older sons are both larger than me. So my oldest, Alex, is about 6'2", and Miles is 6'4", but 230, and I look like a child next to him. There are things you can't do. You can't give them lollipops. You can't pick them up. You can't comfort them in the way, you can't coax things out of them. You can't demand things of them, especially when they're much larger than you. It is so different, and they speak to you about who they are and what they are and who they think you are or might be. And my oldest graduated from grad school, and he picked me up at the airport in his car. It's like, and he has his beard. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's just standing in the driveway of my second kid's girlfriend's house. Like, what's going on? Don't you want dino chicken nuggets? And it always changes, right? Because I'm changing too. And I think Eliot writes about the gifts reserved for age, right? And of course, he's being sardonic, right? It'll keep changing, and when they have kids, it'll probably change more. Colin, yeah.
I was curious, like, what was it like to write about your father?
Oh, I'm still figuring that out. I thought I had a handle on it and him when I started, and then I didn't, and then I did, and then I didn't. And you're trying to capture something on the page, and it moves. Because when I'm sad, my father is one thing. When I'm angry, my father is another thing. When I'm happy, I might not be thinking about him at all, right? My mother is more of a constant now, but my father is unwieldy and difficult. Wonderful person who helped finish this book. I'm going to call you out, Laura. You know I'm going to do it, right? Who was there, like, texting me at 3 a.m. like, why are you up working on my book? This is insane. But I remember asking her about a particular passage in the chapter about my father. I'm like, is this messed up of him? And she's just like, yeah, yes, it is. Oh, okay. Like, so I don't know who has what kind of relationship with whatever parent, but do you ever just step back and say, that wasn't right? Like, you shouldn't go to jazz bars with your dad and light people cigarettes and do long division for his mistress in the smoky room and finish his beers off and think, hey, this is fantastic. Dad loves me. Like, it's just, and then, getting older and checking in with other people, like, no, man, that was fucked up. So, and then there's a fear of turning out to be your parent, which gets some sleepless mornings. Okay, so I get to run away now? Yes? Okay.
Thank you all so much for coming and celebrating Michael. Michael will be signing and personalizing books, where my coworker is pointing in the back right now. We just ask that you grab all of your belongings, because we do break down the space immediately and turn it back into a bookstore. And so just grab all your stuff, and you can line up on that left-hand side of the room. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
I'm actually gonna read the book.